In an interview with CNBC, Stanley Druckenmiller, a highly successful financier in the financial markets, said that the dollar has passed a point of no return towards its decline as a global reserve currency. For Druckenmiller, the observation is simple. The US has entered a phase of decline. This is an opportunity to talk about what a well-run country is and what that means. What, how, and when. We will explore all of this together. Come on, let's go. First of all, the observation is quite simple. If we consider that the debts of the government are never repaid, then we have to deduct the debts contracted annually from the economic growth to obtain a kind of net value creation. From this point of view, the US has been in chronic deficit since the beginning of the 1980s. The crisis of the anti-COVID measures has largely accelerated this process, but the dynamics were already present. Quickly, for those who I hear thinking in their heads that not paying back a country's debt is not serious, I just want to specify that a debt may not be paid back, but it is always paid. Here we have to distinguish between internal debt and external debt. When a country does not pay back its foreign creditors, the cost of this default is paid in various ways, from a fall in confidence in its currency with respect to foreigners, as well as with respect to its population. But it can also go as far as a declaration of war by the unhappy creditor who will want to claim their due. So there are always consequences in getting one's creditors angry. As far as a country's internal debt to its population is concerned, keep in mind that it is paid when it is issued. Once you have taken from John to give to Jack via state intervention in the form of debt on the one hand and subsidy on the other, you have either allowed wealth to be created or you have misallocated capital. In both cases, it is only a transfer of wealth within the country. Not paying back is the same as saying that you have misallocated the capital and that the country has become poorer. On the other hand, the moment when the country has destroyed value corresponds to the moment when the transfer was carried out, and not at the moment when the accountant noticed the loss. I explain this to you to come directly to the financing of the anti-COVID measures by the central banks of the USA and the European Union. Whether or not to repay the debt issued by the FED or the ECB is meaningless because the good or the bad, depending on your point of view, is already done. This is where Stanley Druckenmiller explains that, from his point of view, the determination of interest rates directly by the FED is simply a matter of restoring the financing of the government directly by its central bank. In other words, and very simply, since no one wants to lend money voluntarily to the USA or the EU, the governments have decided to levy unvoted taxes directly on their population in the form of money printing. The governments of the USA and the EU have thus denied a key democratic foundation of a free country, the consent of taxation. No taxes without representation was a slogan of the British in the 14th century that laid the foundation for future Western democracies. The US is thus turning into a socialist regime where political decisions are made collectively by a group of leaders without consulting the people. Stanley Druckenmiller observes this phenomenon from the point of view of the bond markets and announces that the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is doomed, because no currency can be a reservoir of confidence if the government of its issuing country is not credible. We can also approach this question from the angle of public spending in relation to its taxation. After all, tax management is another way of measuring the efficiency of a system. On the one hand, if a country's taxes are at zero, then it is liberal anarchy, and on the other hand, with 100% tax, it's a communist nightmare. So there's a balance to be found between the two, and we can take three examples. Switzerland, as a well-managed country, France, the world record holder in public spending, and the USA, which is in between. With a public expenditure of 33% of GDP, which should remain below 40% with the crisis, Switzerland is promised to restore its accounts because it is the only one of these three countries to have annual surplus budgets. As world champion in public spending, France has 56% of public spending before COVID. In 2021, France exceeded 65% to stabilize at more than 60% after the crisis. France is approaching a point of no return where the weight of public spending eliminates any hope of value creation by the private sector, which is drowning in taxes. Finally, between these two extremes, the USA has a public expenditure of 38% of its GDP, but the crisis of the anti-COVID measures bring it today to about 45%. Unlike Switzerland, it is difficult to see how the US could reduce the weight of the government in the near future, since the US runs a deficit budget every year. Moreover, the Biden administration is working to raise taxes and increase government spending. The US will surely have an increase in GDP, but certainly not in wealth. To understand the internal logic of each country regarding the creation of value, I had fun looking at how wealth is taxed in these countries. In a simplified way, wealth is created by companies and then shareholders are paid either in dividends or in wages. So for €100 of turnover, the first taxes of the company are VAT and corporate tax. Then, for the shareholders to get a consumption income, you have to add income tax. At this point, you get a very rough estimate of the company's profits by adding VAT and corporate tax, and you get the personal tax by taking the income tax. So for a country that thinks that it is companies that create value and that it is the shareholders and employees who benefit from it, it is necessary to tax the company very little so that it reinvests and to tax the distribution of the company's income more. On the contrary, a country whose leaders think that it is the government via taxes that creates wealth, then you have an interest in taxing companies more and people less. I put the VAT on business taxation because I assume that if the VAT disappeared, businesses would raise their prices. This seems logical to me since their customers are already used to paying VAT in the selling price of companies. Here's the result. In France, companies are taxed at 20% VAT and 28% corporate income tax, i.e. 40%. In the USA, let's say that the VAT, or its equivalent depending on the state, is about 7%, and we add 28% of corporate tax, that is 31%. Finally, in Switzerland, the VAT is 7%, and the corporate tax is 14.5%, i.e. 21%. We always find the same classification. More amusingly, in France and the USA, shareholders benefit from a flat tax of 30% on dividend income. Therefore, personal income from capital is less taxed than companies, which is more favorable to the rentier than to the employee. I specify that pensioners are part of what I call rentiers since they live on their pensions. On the other hand, in Switzerland, there is no flat tax. Capital income is taxed on a progressive scale. Moreover, Switzerland does not have a capital gains tax, but it does have a wealth tax. Once again, the message is clear. Make your fortune first, and we will tax you later. In other words, the USA and even France have a more favorable tax system when you are a rentier than Switzerland, which has the reputation of being a tax haven. In Switzerland, the last tax bracket is 40%, so if you are rich, you will pay less tax in France than in Switzerland, if we take into account the tax package, which is an exception. So the best managed country of our ranking gives free rein to the entrepreneurs to reinvest because the Swiss think that wealth is created in companies while France is a country that favors the rentier to the detriment of the economy. Surprising, isn't it? As far as the USA is concerned, with the policy of the Biden administration, they are moving away from the Swiss recipe to get closer to French socialism. Personally, I'm a strong supporter of freedom and capitalism. I believe that it is business and labor that create wealth, although I readily accept that economic growth can be counterproductive with certain activities. For example, it is hard to argue that the world would be less rich if the tobacco industry did not exist. All wealth creation must have a meaning and serve a purpose, a mission. However, giving the power to a government to judge the relevance of one economic project or another seems to me highly suspicious because the decision makers, the politicians, do not have any skin in the game. They do not take risks. That's why they are bound to make bad decisions. And on that note, see you soon for new videos. Ciao.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like my videos, please subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell if you want to be notified of the next episode. And if you want to invest in the stock market over the long term or diversify your financial portfolio, I'm offering you an analysis of the 8 European star stocks to have. Thanks again for watching and have a great day.